Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to the HC Conversations podcast, a podcast where two pastors sit down and we just talk about stuff that's going on, the intersection of life and faith, and so sometimes it's on the lighter side, sometimes it's on the more serious side. So that's what we're doing. We are in this current season, whatever season it is, we're talking about deconstruction and that kind of phenomenon all season long. We're going to continue that conversation today, but before we do... How you been, Paul?
Hey, I'm Paul, by the way.
Do we have to introduce ourselves every single time?
Well, maybe for some people that they're new to the podcast.
But maybe they're like, oh, they didn't introduce themselves. I want to know who they are, so they'll have to go back and listen.
Maybe. But hey, I'm doing pretty good.
I'm Phil.
Last time we were together, we talked about a van. We were wavering between two. We were vacillating between two different ones. Well, we didn't go with any of those. Instead, we got a van last week. A light blue Honda Odyssey. So we are in the Honda cult now.
Hey, welcome. First of all, welcome to the cult.
I know, because you're in the Honda cult.
We're in the Honda cult.
Once you have a Honda, you always have a Honda, from what I've heard.
But let me just say, the Lord provides.
Yes.
Providing that van.
Yes, he does.
So that's cool. You're officially van life.
Van life.
Van dad. He's a van dad. This is great.
I don't drive it that much, so.
Yeah, I know. You still drive your truck, but you have a van, and you will drive the van.
That's right.
But
so, how you doing, Phil?
Pretty good. Nothing exciting to report in my life. Like, we didn't get a van or anything. Okay. So, I got nothing.
Same old.
I shoved a drill bit into my hand.
Yeah, I mean, that's
over the
not
weekend.
Exciting, but
no, that's a little sore.
Painful.
But yeah, it's feeling okay. That's it.
And if any of you were joining us yesterday for our Sunday gathering,
I guess that's exciting.
You should know, by the way, that number one, that we're going to 2 services on November the 5th, so that's exciting. But also, before you guys got to church yesterday, if you're part of Hope Community, Pastor Phil had his entire hand like medical taped.
I did. I had gauze and wrap. Like, I looked like I was getting ready for a boxing match.
And we both agreed that was not a good look.
I'm like, that's going to be distracting. So I just
found some giant Band-Aids.
I put a Band-Aid on, a little bit of the clear medical tape to hold it in place. Yeah.
So,
I should have done both hands.
Yeah.
I'm about to fight the devil up in here.
Played the Rocky theme song as you walked up. So we're a week behind in getting this episode recorded.
We are.
Because we were in the middle of a construction project last week. There's lots of noise.
Yeah. Well, last Monday when we should have been recording, we were knocking out walls.
Yeah. So it just wasn't a good time. So here we are. We are back to give the people what they want. And what they want today.
I don't know about that. We're going to give them something. I don't know if it's what they want.
What they want today is they want to hear part 2 of our series on deconstruction, where today we're talking about church hurt. Specifically, like why people maybe leave the faith because of being hurt by the church, and then maybe we can help with some paths forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think I did just want to mention, like, kind of by way of, it's not really a recap, it's kind of recap. So this series, this season, last month was kind of an intro. There is this, it depends on what circles you run in. You may have never heard about deconstruction or hashtag deconstruction, hashtag exvangelical, hashtag whatever, like leaving the faith. If you spend a lot of time like in certain corners of the internet, you would think that like 95% of Christians are leaving the faith. Or if that's not you, you may not even know that this is a thing. And so we're talking about it this season, and why is this phenomenon happening? And then like the reasons that are most commonly listed. These were compiled. There was an original article or a source where these, like, I think there's 10. Are there 10? Mm-hmm. 10 things that people kind of is a reason for deconstruction. We can't find the original source now, but we're going to talk about these 10 things anyway.
We should have put it in our spreadsheet. We didn't.
Yes. At least we have a spreadsheet. There's at least an agenda. So we're going to jump into that conversation today. I think it is important to note, and this just popped in my head because we were doing some research beforehand, and this was something that John Mark Comer was saying. He has a lot of really good things to say in general, but on this topic of, like, there is actually a version of, I wouldn't use the phrase deconstruction because it's such a loaded term now. There is a version of taking your faith and looking at it critically that is a good thing, where you take it and say, okay, what of this is actual biblical Christianity? What of this is good? What of this is healthy? And that is a pattern that we see in the scriptures. The Old Testament prophets, like, they were coming along telling the people of Israel, hey, your faith isn't genuine. You've got this thing all messed up. Let's get to what it was supposed to be. Jesus comes along and does this famously in the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard it said, I say to you. There have been kind of reformers in the church throughout church history that have pushed us in that direction. But what he points out, John Mark Comer points out, is that in those circumstances, what we do is we take the scripture, we take the Christian faith, and we use that as like the standard, and we critique how faith has gotten off the rails, and we use the scripture to critique the faith and get back to what it was meant to be. Our kind of modern deconstruction doesn't do that. It takes culture and the world and our enlightened ideas and uses that to critique the scriptures. And so there's a backwardsness about it. And so we kind of want to go, hey, what are some of these things that have led to this? What does it look like to try to faithfully follow Jesus in it's 2023 right now, but in the 21st century, how do we do this? So yeah, that's what we're doing. And I had something else to say, and I don't remember what it was.
I don't know, but what you said was just good.
Okay. It was still thanks. So we're going to talk about one of the primary reasons. Oh, I know this is going to be one of those podcasts. I know what the other thing was. This topic of people like deconstructing and leaving. I haven't got to read the actual book yet that this is based on, but there have been a couple podcasts where one of the authors has been interviewed talking about like the great de-churching in America. I can't even remember the guy's name at the moment, but looked like the great de-churching in America. I know the research for it was done in partnership with Ryan Burge, who's like a cultural researcher type dude. But the number is something like 40 million people have left the church in America over the last, I don't know how many decades. But it's a lot. But the vast majority of that has not been from the perspective of I'm mad at the church, I'm deconstructing, I'm leaving my faith. We almost are kind of taught to think that's the vast majority of people leaving. That is a segment of the people leaving, and I want to say it was something like 2.5 or 3 million of the 40 million. But a lot of the reasons that people leave are a lot more innocent. It's, hey, we moved and never found a new church. Hey, COVID happened. We got out of the habit. We never got back into church. So yeah, I think it's just important to keep things in perspective. Deconstruction is a thing. People are leaving the faith. But it's primarily a Western and American thing. And it is not nearly as big of a thing as what we think it is.
Right.
Still, we want to talk about it. And you've done the hard work. You've put in the time, Paul. You looked up the author's name.
I did.
Okay.
It's Jim.
Enlighten us.
It's Jim Davis. I don't think it's the same Jim Davis that's the creator of the Garfield cartoon.
But it would be cool if it was.
It would be cool.
Yeah. Jim Davis. I believe he's a pastor in Florida, and somebody else wrote it with him, and they used research from Ryan Burge. I want to get that book. I can't necessarily recommend it to you yet because I've never read it, but based on some of his interviews on some of the podcast rounds he's making, I think it's going to be really, really good. So,
yeah, it's a data-driven book, not an opinion-driven book.
Facts, numbers, figures. Facts and figures. Questions of science and reason. I don't know. Something.
You've lost me.
Yeah.
All right, so.
There's some lyrics to a Coldplay song. Anyway, all of that sets up where we're going today. One of the primary reasons that either people who have deconstructed listed or just when you kind of dig beneath the surface, one of the things that you find is a very common reason is church hurt.
And it's usually spiritually or emotionally hurt. Sometimes physically hurt by the church, although that's not as much, but
it does happen.
It does happen. And over the last I'd say like 2-3 years, the Southern Baptist Convention, it was a report was released that they covered up a lot of hurt and abuse that was done by the church.
Yep.
And so maybe somebody was a survivor of that or a victim of that. So it's very real. We're not trying to make light of the fact that sometimes people are abused by people within the church. And that sometimes then those situations are not handled as they should be.
Yeah.
So that's a very common thing. But Phil, I'm just curious, have you been hurt by the church?
Oh gosh, Paul, I'm a pastor. Yes. So that answer is unequivocally yes.
Yes. And
I mean, just on different levels from when I've been a pastor, but also just when I just used to go to church before. I would say before I was really involved, the answer was no, because it's almost one of those things, and this is just anecdotal. I feel like you have to have a certain level of like involvement and bought-inness to really be hurt by the church. It's the same thing with like a relationship, right? If you if you're not super close to a person, they really can't hurt you that much. But the closer that you get, the more you know them, the more you trust them, then the potential to really be hurt kind of opens up. So when I was kind of nominal in my faith, just kind of go to church now and then, it's like, yeah, I never was really hurt by the church. But as I began to pursue Jesus more, and I started serving, and I started being committed, and then started in like different volunteer roles and positions of leadership, like the closer and closer I got, the more and more opportunities to be hurt presented themselves. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, the more that was like, okay, now this really hurts. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
Same question.
Answer is yes. And I could list a number of different occasions from the time I was in like elementary, middle school, high school, at the church I grew up in. Not going to go into details in those situations. But one of the things that I remember thinking is saying is that, things happen in a church. Pastors sometimes cause problems and then they just leave. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, I don't ever want to be a pastor. And then look, what happened? God got me. So that happens. And then I will share the last hurt. And thinking about it now, it's just kind of like, really, are we really having this conversation right now? But serving at another church where I was in a leadership position, and a sweet old lady came up to me and said, "So-and-so is leaving the church because you're single, and what do you think about that?" It's like Jesus, the Apostle Paul, who started more churches than about anyone, mm-hmm. and responsible for most of our New Testament.
Yeah,
he was single.
Yeah, so.
Well, I'm like, really, like, you really don't like know the Bible,
and the
story of the
Bible?
church that much. So yeah, just that was being hurt by a church, an example of that. So
I have some examples that I don't want to share because it's like it might be a little too. Mm-hmm. No, I don't want people to feel called out, I guess. But similarly, I can remember some sillier ones that were just like, where you put so much into something, especially like if you're in a volunteer position or a leadership position, and then for people to come and just like basically rip everything that you're doing, or doing youth ministry for a long time, being treated like, well, you're not a real pastor. It's like, oh, you're not yet. Like I can remember like offhanded comments of, and I probably shouldn't have said this. Okay, I was like in my early 20s, okay? I was told on a Sunday, because, if you're part of our church or whatever, I don't really dress up, okay? Like jeans and a shirt with a collar is about as far as I go. So I've always been that way. And Sunday mornings, I would be doing like kids ministry programming stuff, right? And I'm pretty sure it was summertime, and I had a pair of shorts on, and I was like, dude, I'm leading elementary age students at church right now, and kind of got some walk by and kind of said the comment like, well, must be nice. I wish I could wear shorts to church. And I was like, well, why don't you? I just kept walking. So, but it's just that kind of like little thing. Like, well, you're not serious because you don't look the part.
I wonder if that was the same person that made a comment to me one Sunday where I showed up to church in shorts.
Yeah.
Because the air conditioning was out and it's the middle of summer.
Yeah.
And then got grabbed to help serve a communion or something. Yeah. And I wasn't supposed to be serving that day. So hence the reason why I wore shorts instead of dress clothes. And that person was not happy with me.
And those are some silly things, but more than that, like there's been like deep personal betrayals of like, I thought we were best friends. I thought we were in this together. Like, and my world is falling apart now because of what another person has done, and like the fallout from that. And you were a part of that as well. And so church hurt's a real thing. Shoot, let's be honest. Even in the context of Hope Community, like there's moments of hurt. Like people will say things, or people will leave and be like, yeah, bye, I'm out of here. And I'm like, okay, well, man, like it's been like 2 years or 3 years of investing and knowing a person, and then they're out. Or we've hurt each other like pretty much on a regular basis, just so you know, not a regular basis, like maybe once a year, simply because of the nature of you're down 1 day a week. You know what I mean? And so there's communication that doesn't happen. And it's like once a year, like, hey man, I'm feeling like this right now. And you're like, yeah, and I'm feeling like this right now. And we're like, but it's not really that way. We should just talk about this. And so it's, I don't know, for us, like when you're dealing with church, you're talking, it's cliche. We talk about all the time. The church isn't a building. The church is people, and people are messed up.
Yeah. And people hurt each other.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the church, we don't always like to acknowledge that and deal with it like we do in other areas of life. Especially whenever we get hurt in certain ways, it's common just to run away instead of dealing with whatever situation. And if you've been hurt by the church, I'm not saying that you just ran away or that you didn't try to overcome and solve a problem and that you left as a last resort. But so often we take the easy road out instead of trying to solve whatever problem. And so one of the things that maybe you've picked up on as we've been talking is whenever people talk about being hurt by the church, one thing that they usually don't do is they paint, number one, they paint with a broad brush and say, I've been hurt by the church, instead of saying, I've been hurt by an individual or by a few people within the church. And so we a lot of times then carry that over into, well, all churches are the same. All churches are just going to hurt me. And that's not always the case. Yeah. There's definitely churches that have maybe a reputation for hurting people or for chewing up volunteers and spitting them out and causing damage in the process. I'm just picturing that image right now of like getting chewed on. It's like, yeah, that's going to cause a wound.
Yeah. No, that's really that broad brushing. Like when you say, hey, the church has hurt me. And I'm like, I mean, like billion Christians are on the planet right now. They've all hurt you. That's crazy. But it's understandable when we're in a place of pain or hurt. Is like it's when emotions are involved. Yeah, it's easier to do that. And I think what you said was important. Of like, hey, if you have been hurt by the church, we're not excusing that or saying, well, you should just get over it. But that because a lot of times, like you should. Like there's a lot of cases where you should leave. I don't necessarily think leaving is like the first option, right? It's like something happens once, okay, address it, try to work through it. It happens again, maybe try it again. If a pattern emerges, then it's like, well, now it's time to leave. But I also would say for those who are in the church, it's like we have to be willing to hear that, even if we feel, because there's going to be moments when. Gosh, I don't know how to say this without sounding kind of, I don't know, aggressive, but we're in a very sensitive culture, okay? Words are violence kind of thinking. And so sometimes, not all the time, sometimes things that people will say, well, that was spiritual abuse or the church hurt me. And I was like, was it? Or were you just told something you didn't like? Because there's a difference, and we have to have discernment to know. Sometimes that's the case. That's not always the case. Either way, if you are on the, whether you've actually been on the giving end of, a church hurt, not on the receiving end, but if you've been on the giving end of it, whether it was legit or it was only perceived that way, we need to have the humility to hear what the other person is saying.
Right.
To not, because a lot of times the first thing we do is we go into defensive mode. No, I didn't. You misheard me. It's like, okay, maybe they did mishear you. Maybe they did misunderstand you, but what they are feeling is very real. And so like the first step is just acknowledge, okay, I understand you're feeling that way. And like, I'm sorry for that. And then maybe you work from there. Here's what my intent was. Here's what my heart was. And you do like the hard Christian thing. You seek reconciliation. You seek understanding. You do those things. And so I think there's responsibility on both ends to be like, we have to have the humility to receive criticism and not be defensive. Man, I've noticed this of myself. I've noticed this of like a lot of, just, it's a human thing, but in the church, we need to be better. Like defensiveness is always our first, like as soon as someone brings up something that's even the least bit like might paint us in the bad light, we're just like, no, our defenses are up, our guards are up. And we got to be better at, not doing that.
Right.
And then on the other end, if you feel that hurt, if you've been hurt, like, are you open to think, hey, maybe are we too quick to assign motives to people and intentions to people, or do we give people the benefit of the doubt? Again, if a pattern emerges, that's different. But yeah, I'm done rambling.
Okay. So along with that, one thing that we also have to recognize is that if you are part of a church, if you're trying to follow Jesus, is that we are incomplete new people. Okay, so we are made new by Jesus, but yet we are not fully new. That beast in us still comes out every once in a while. And so we are also capable of hurting others, and perhaps have hurt others just as much as perhaps we have been hurt by others or by the church. So we have to come face to face with that in us, and not write us out of the equation sometimes. And say that, that helps us to have understanding of perhaps the other person. It's like, wow, I wonder what they're dealing with, or I wonder why they acted this way, and that, I wonder what's in me that could cause me to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It looks like you're getting ready to drop some Bonhoeffer.
I'm going to pull up my Bonhoeffer quote. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer has a really good quote from his book Life Together, about the church, and I got to find it here.
Dude, you have so many tabs open.
Sorry. I don't bookmark stuff. I just leave the tab open so I can go back to it.
Oh my goodness! If I get past like 4,
and then
I have to scroll. I'm like, no, I can't do it.
I close them.
I can't do it.
I don't do that on my computer.
Yeah, but just on your phone.
Just on my phone, because it's a lot easier not to see them. Versus on my phone, you can, or my a computer, you can see like you've got tons of tabs open. Yeah. Once they get all the way across the screen, I close them. Like I just close the browser. Yeah. And start over, because I can't handle that many. Versus like some people, they've got like 30 tabs or 40 tabs, and they're like teeny tiny little snippets. What they are. Yeah, so it's like, how can you find what you're looking for? But okay, so Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian, died in World War II.
I was reading something. This is off topic. I was reading something about him the other day. He died when he was like 34.
Yeah, I know.
I'm like, he was our age.
I know. Bonhoeffer did so much in a short life.
I think there's not to feel guilty about it, but like just in general, like followers of Jesus who have come before us that have had like just such hardship, and I'm like, man, I have it easy. And like, I'm 34. What have I done compared to Bonhoeffer? Not that we're supposed to be comparing ourselves to people, but it's like, dang. Anyway.
So Bonhoeffer states this in his book Life Together, which is a great book.
It's hard to read.
It's a very dense book.
It was written in the 40s, 30s.
The late 30s.
Late 30s, early 40s. And it was in German, translated into English. Yeah, it's like...
yeah.
It's not as hard to read as The Cost of Discipleship, though. Because that one's like 5 times as long. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
So Bonhoeffer states that Christian community is not an ideal we have to realize, but rather a reality created by God in Christ, in which we may participate. And so I really like what he's saying, that quote, is that oftentimes we have an ideal of what we think the Christian community should look like, and sometimes whenever it doesn't meet that, or whenever we bump up against people that might hurt us or say things that we don't like, that it's usually bumping up against our picture of what the church should be instead of what actually God says the church is, and the reality is that we get to participate in the system that God has already set up, with people that are messed up, with people that are broken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. It's about the journey. It is. It's a process, and I think there's something that gets mixed up in it, though, because we're talking about faith, we're talking about Jesus, we're talking about people who are supposed to be filled with the Spirit. It's like sometimes that tension is hard to live in the already but not yet. Mm-hmm. It's like, for me, it's easier to conceptualize that in terms of the world at large, creation at large. It's already, the kingdom is already here, but it's not yet. But then when I think about that in terms of people, it's harder. Because I'm like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be a Christian. It's like, yeah, it's already, but not yet. And so it's just more difficult. Gosh, what else do we have on?
So you were talking about some things that Jackie Hill Perry said.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast, At Home with the Perrys, and they had been through a season of church hurt where they just kind of stopped going to church altogether. And it was like, I've got I'm getting a phone call. It's actually important. It's my father-in-law calling me. He's probably calling about finishing drywall, but yeah, I'll call him back after that. But yeah, like there was a season of church hurt, and where they weren't attending a local church anymore, and they kind of had the thinking of like, well, fine, we have Christian friends. Isn't that enough? Isn't that community enough? And it's like, Preston, her husband, actually was like, I realized and had this conviction that Christian community is good, but it doesn't necessarily replace church. With God kind of being a God of order, and there being like some structure, and there's some leadership and someone that I'm accountable to. But one of the things that was said in that, of several things that were said, 2 things that really stood out. One was the fact that, yes, the church hurt me, but the church also healed me. That there was a church hurt that they had from a previous church and what was done, but that wound was never healed until they were back into a church community where they could find healing. And so, man, it's like if you've been hurt by a church and you're carrying that wound, there is going to be a woundedness that I believe will never be fully healed until you find a church community where you can find that healing in. Mm-hmm. Because one of the realities, as much as we maybe don't like it or push against it, is the vehicle through which God has chosen to work like in our midst, the hands and feet of Jesus, the physical, tangible presence of God on earth. It's his body. It's the church. And so it's like, man, if we want to experience the healing and power of Jesus, that comes through the church. And so it's like, man, if you've been hurt by the church and you want healing from that, it's going to happen in the church. That's not saying go back to the church that hurt you, but it is saying, one, not every church is that church. Right. And I know the way that things are painted in the media, and like we hear these stories, it's always like negative about the church, negative. The really good, life-giving, beautiful churches don't get airtime, but they do exist. Mm-hmm. Find one and find healing. So that was the one thing that was mentioned. The other thing was just kind of straight up, you can't separate the church, like Jesus, from his church. The Apostle Paul, before he becomes Paul, he's Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus. He gets knocked off the horse, literally has a, knock you off your horse, see the light moment, and it's Jesus. And he asks Saul, who would become Paul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Like Saul had been persecuting the church and beating Christians and having Christians thrown in jail. And it's like, but the question that Jesus asks is, why are you persecuting me? That there is a very real sense in which if you write off the church and give up the church, you're giving up Jesus as well. And like that's a hard pill to swallow, I think, as like especially as Americans, we have this rebellious, individualistic, I'm not part of the system streak in us that goes all the way back to before we were a country, and we're like, we're pioneers, and we're like, it's built into us. But that's, again, like Jesus, like the church is called his bride. Like we're the body, he's the head. There's all this imagery. And he says, when you persecute me, or the church, you persecute me. When you walk away from the church, you walk away from me. And so I think like just grappling with that reality of like, not every church is the church that may have hurt you, and that you won't find healing until like full healing from church hurt until you find a church that you can experience healing in. And there's going to be a disconnectedness. I'm not saying you're completely disconnected from Jesus, that you don't have a faith right now, but it's not what it could be apart from his church. So yeah, those are a couple things that I was listening to. I'm like, man, this is so true. And so what's what I found true in my own life as well. Right. Like, for example, the healing of the church. Yes, this is the church we pastor, so I'm going to be biased. But when I found healing from things of the church in the past, it's happened through the people in the church that is Hope Community, because it's like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. So for what it's worth, there it is.
All right. So in summary, if you have walked away from the church because you've been hurt and it caused you to deconstruct, number one, know that all churches aren't going to hurt you. Number two, recognize that it wasn't necessarily the church, but it was a person or a couple people in the church. Number three, take the next step and try church again. Don't give up on Jesus, on his church, because it's beautiful. In that you can find healing, you can find life, you can find deep and lasting friendships. So why not give it a try again?
Yep. And I would say on the other end of that, for those of us that are still in a church, be humble when things are brought up, and be people who are healers.
Yes.
Humble healers.
Yep.
For people that are experiencing pain or have experienced pain from the church.
All right.
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us for the HD Conversations podcast. We will see you next time as we continue our conversation on deconstruction.
Yep. Bye, everyone.